The snow had fallen heavily the night before, burying the edge of Red Hollow, Montana, beneath a thick, suffocating white silence that seemed to absorb all sound and hope. The air was brittle, sharp with ice, and the scant scent of pine only emphasized the overwhelming cold of early January, the kind of morning when the low, diffused sunlight barely managed to pierce the iron-colored clouds hanging heavy and frozen over the mountain town. To the town's northern outskirts, past the dormant railroad tracks and the broken, leaning fencing of what was once a booming logging supply yard, stood a grim, silent monument to neglect. An abandoned warehouse complex, 3 stories tall, its red bricks flaking from years of relentless weather and utter disuse, its many windows either shattered entirely or crudely boarded up with warped plywood, a chain-link fence, half collapsed and bristling with rust, serving as a futile warning to potential trespassers with faded no-entry signs that nobody had heeded in years. It was through this ghostly, frozen landscape that a figure moved with a cautious, almost surgical determination. A figure that, by all rights, should have either been warm or long gone. A German shepherd, his ribs alarmingly visible beneath a patchy coat that was matted with mud and rime. Yet he moved with the disciplined cadence of a much stronger animal. His name, once proudly etched on a sturdy leather collar now long gone, was Ranger, though the world hadn't called him anything but Stray in over a year. Ranger was a strong, lean specimen, about 7 years old, clearly an animal built for work, possessing the distinctive black and tan markings of his breed, though his once gleaming coat was now permanently weather-beaten, caked with snow and the grime of survival. He bore a small but distinct notch on his right ear, a permanent triangular scar he'd acquired during a rescue drill years ago when a small rockfall had surprised his unit in the mountains. His eyes, deep amber rings set in black, were remarkably alert and held a focused intelligence and discipline that belied his current status as a forgotten wanderer, the gaze of a soldier who had seen too much but never learned how to quit. Ranger had once been a highly certified search and rescue K9, trained to find lost hikers and detect survivors in earthquake rubble, a life of mission and meaning that ended not in a blaze of glory on the field, but in a sudden, catastrophic loss. His handler and home had been Captain Sarah Grady, a striking, tall woman whose sharp, focused eyes and sun-bronzed skin spoke of a life spent outdoors. Her voice an unusual texture of gravel, softened by an innate kindness that Ranger had utterly devoted himself to. Sarah had been an officer in the U.S. Army, leading a highly specialized K9 unit before transitioning to civilian SAR work, and when she tragically died in a sudden apartment fire, trapped during an evacuation that went terribly wrong, something fundamental and vital had shattered inside Ranger. He had fought the burning beams and smoke until his paws were shredded and bleeding, driven by a loyalty stronger than his own fear. But the fire had claimed her anyway. When the department tried to take him in, the regimented structure felt like a cold, empty cage. And one night, overwhelmed by a grief that humans rarely understood, he simply slipped away into the woods, becoming the silent, four-legged ghost haunting the outskirts of town, surviving off instinct and the fading echo of her command. But on this particular frigid morning, something arrested the dog's cautious movement, stopping him dead in his tracks. A sound, a muffled, almost imperceptible human whimper. It wasn't the low, familiar cry of a fox or the broken bleat of a wounded deer. No, this was distinctly human, low, weak, and utterly desperate, a noise muffled by wood, concrete, and the insulating layer of newly fallen snow. Ranger stopped, his notched ear twitching violently as he cocked his head, listening intently as the sound came again. He turned toward the massive, desolate bulk of the warehouse, his nose working furiously, inhaling the cold air until the scent struck him hard, an overwhelming mixture of blood, dried sweat, and deep, primal fear. This was human distress, unmistakable and urgent. Ranger dropped into a stealthy, low-to-the-ground creep, his paws silent and efficient on the packed snow, moving along the crumbling foundation of the building until he located a narrow, almost invisible crack in a basement window, barely wide enough to breathe through. He pressed his cold snout against the dirty, frosted glass, his warm breath immediately fogging the pane slightly, but it was enough to see inside. The scene within, illuminated only by a single, flickering bulb strung from a frayed wire overhead, rooted Ranger to the spot, activating the old mission protocols deep within his DNA. In the center of the concrete, oil-stained room, a man was secured to a metal chair. His head hung forward, weighted down, a black cloth wrapped tightly, cruelly around his eyes, effectively blinding him. His wrists and ankles were bound with rough cord that had already rubbed his skin raw and bleeding. This was the man who had vanished. Captain Jake Harper, 35 years old, lean, wiry, and built like a tripwire, even now. Jake wore a mud-stained, tattered tactical shirt and pants, the uniform of a man who had chosen a life of quiet preparedness. He possessed the hard, angular features of a man who had spent too much time operating under pressure, with closely cropped dark hair and a short, precise beard that did little to soften the weary focus around his eyes. Eyes that were now covered and useless. Jake was a decorated former Army Special Forces captain, a man whose existence was defined by control, discipline, and absolute refusal to submit, skills he had acquired after years of operational tours overseas. The town had plastered his photo, a stoic, determined image, across every pole and shop window for 3 days, urging people to find the local hero. Though Ranger hadn't understood the printed words, he understood only the urgency of the scent. The man inside reeked of pain. Yes, but also a fierce, familiar, residual strength. The same steady, rock-solid determination that Sarah used to carry when they were out on a difficult mountain deployment. Inside the suffocating, cold silence of the concrete prison, Jake stirred, a faint, involuntary moan escaping his lips as his ribs protested against the confines of the chair. Ranger let out a very low, almost inaudible growl, an instinctive, non-menacing sound of contact. Jake's head shot up instantly. He couldn't see, but he heard the sound, a distinct animal noise that sliced through the humming silence. His voice was rough, brittle from dehydration. "Who's there?" he rasped, the question edged with the exhaustion of a 3-day fight. "Please, for God's sake, help me." Ranger's paws scratched lightly at the frosted glass. Jake froze, his military training instantly overriding his panic. He registered the low growl again, this time softer, exploratory. "Dog," he whispered, a question and a plea coalescing into one word. "Is that a dog? Is that a K9? In that critical instant, the final remnants of Ranger's lost life clicked back into place. This wasn't just a man in pain. This was a rescue. This was a mission, and Ranger was the only one on the scene who could carry it out. He pawed again, harder, but the window remained stubbornly sealed, the concrete walls too thick and unyielding to breach, the scent of blood and cold mildew curling deep into his nostrils. He couldn't get in yet, but he knew he could remember. He could return. The faint sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps from upstairs broke the silence. Cole tensed violently as the single overhead bulb flickered in response to movement beyond the doorway. The captor was returning. Ranger immediately melted back, silent as snow hitting water, vanishing into the shadows, the mission now clear. Extract evidence. Return for help. Ranger moved with the desperate, low-slung urgency of a predator who had just spotted his target but knew better than to charge. Melting back into the shadows of the abandoned logging yard, his mind, or what functioned as his operational core, focused solely on the single overriding directive: extract and report. The captor's heavy, slow footsteps sounded directly overhead now. Pausing, perhaps testing the door to the small concrete room, confirming that the prisoner remained where he should be. But Ranger was already gone, traversing the broken terrain, his limp less pronounced now, overridden by the adrenaline of a live mission. He knew he needed more than a desperate growl to save the soldier inside. He needed a human who possessed resources and, crucially, the willingness to believe in a ghost. The scent of blood and pain clung to his nose, driving him forward. But as he moved, a secondary, metallic scent caught his attention along the fence line, near a spot where the heavy snow cover had been recently disturbed by dragging. He stopped, nose low to the packed earth and rime, detecting the strong, unmistakable scent of Jake. And there it was, half buried in the drift, a single, muddy, and badly scuffed boot. It was a standard-issue tactical boot, the kind worn by infantry and special operators, its leather scarred, the sole pattern distinct. Ranger sniffed it once, hard, then gently, deliberately, clamped his powerful jaws around the ankle collar, ensuring his teeth only brushed the thick leather, and he began to move, retracing his path toward the distant scent of civilization and warmth. Several blocks away, closer to the quiet, snow-dusted edges of Red Hollow's Main Street, a woman emerged from a small utilitarian metal building with chipping blue paint that read Bennett Animal Clinic. She was Lisa Bennett, 28 years old, the kind of woman who looked gentle but possessed a spine made of annealed steel, a necessary trait for managing the endless procession of sick pets and heartbroken owners. Lisa was short, pale-skinned beneath a generous dusting of cinnamon-colored freckles across her nose and cheeks, and her naturally strawberry blonde hair was usually confined to a loose, perpetually messy bun that allowed stubborn curls to escape around her forehead. Her demeanor was famously calm and warm, almost soothing, a contrast to the slightly guarded, weary look in her pale blue eyes, a permanent baggage left from years of tending to the animals people habitually gave up on. Having grown up in Red Hollow, Lisa had left only long enough for veterinary school before returning to inherit the clinic after her father's passing, inheriting his practice along with his private, deeply ingrained habit of quietly feeding the various strays that haunted the alley behind the building. That morning, she carried a dish of kibble soaked in warm broth and a thermos cap of steaming water, placing them on a cold cement slab behind the clinic, before whistling softly, a low, inviting sound. "Come on, boy," she murmured into the frigid air. "You've earned breakfast." To her surprise, the German shepherd, the massive, scarred stray she had only seen from a distance and had taken to calling soldier due to his focused intensity, approached immediately, limping noticeably on his rear leg, his amber eyes wary but fixed on her with absolute, unwavering purpose. Lisa squatted low, a non-threatening gesture that offered space and patience. "You look like you've been through hell," she said softly. But the dog she knew as Soldier didn't eat right away. Instead, he dropped the item he was carrying directly at her boots, let go, and backed up 2 purposeful steps. Lisa blinked, staring down at the object, a mud-crusted, thoroughly torn and wet military-issue boot. As she picked it up, her heart seized instantly. The dull, stained leather bore a faded patch near the heel, an emblem she recognized. A silver star superimposed on a small pine tree crest, marking it as official Red Hollow local issue, likely from the National Guard training facility nearby. But the faint, undeniable traces of dried blood near the tongue and heel sent a nauseating chill through her. This wasn't a discarded piece of trash. Ranger held her gaze steadily. Then, without a single sound, he turned with sudden, fierce determination and disappeared back toward the desolate northern boundary of the town, leaving her alone with the shocking evidence in her hands. Lisa stared at the bloody boot, her heart hammering against her ribs as the local news stream she pulled up on her phone buffered and played. Captain Jake Harper, age 35, decorated former Army Special Forces, last seen 3 nights ago. No sign of struggle, no vehicle, no body, just a local hero vanished into the dark. The sickening realization of the connection hit her. The missing veteran, the military boot, the intense, mission-driven dog. She snatched her phone and dialed the only number she knew. Within 20 minutes, the door to the clinic opened, admitting a tall man who shook snow off his heavy brown sheriff's coat. This was Sheriff Mason Briggs, 62 years old, a man whose lined, weathered face was framed by a short, neatly trimmed white beard that made him look less like a stern lawman and more like a tired, aging patriarch. Briggs had served Red Hollow longer than anyone could remember, known for his quiet, almost glacial demeanor, his deliberate habit of taking long, contemplative pauses before any major decision, and an unwavering belief in following his gut instinct, even when the facts were thin. His expression was tight, etched with the strain of 3 sleepless nights spent searching for one of their own. He removed his thick leather gloves and looked down at the muddy boot Lisa handed him, his eyes scanning it with professional detachment. "You said a dog brought this in, Ms. Bennett?" Lisa nodded quickly, her voice hushed but firm. "A German shepherd, male, severely malnourished, old scar on his right ear, limped slightly. But Sheriff, he wasn't just scavenging. He was focused, like he had a mission to complete." Briggs grunted softly, turning the boot over once, his fingers brushing the dried mud. "This is Jake's size," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "His name is still faintly marked on the inside lining from his deployment days." He looked up, his weary gray eyes finally meeting Lisa's intense blue ones. "Where exactly did the dog go?" Lisa gestured decisively toward the rear alley. "North, toward the tree line and the old lumberyard compound." Briggs exhaled slowly, a puff of visible vapor in the warm clinic air. "That place hasn't seen a soul since the timber plant closed 12 years ago. Locals call it dead ground." He paused, rubbing his jaw. "I think that dog wants you to follow him, Sheriff," Lisa said quietly, conviction firming her voice. Briggs looked down at the physical evidence, then back at the earnest, determined young woman, finally giving a single decisive nod. "Then we better start preparing the team for a search at dawn. A stray dog is more of a lead than we've had all week." The sterile, flickering fluorescent light of the Red Hollow Sheriff's Department back office did little to warm the frigid atmosphere, as Sheriff Mason Briggs convened a tight, low-key meeting to discuss the highly unconventional lead. He held the bloody, mud-caked tactical boot in a clear evidence bag, the faint, faded print of Harper visible on the inside lining, letting the gravity of the silent evidence settle over the 2 key members of his team seated across the table. Leaning against a large, outdated map of Red Hollow's North Quadrant was Sergeant Claire Durham, 34 years old, lean and physically precise, possessing close-cropped dark hair and a permanent look of intense, tactical concentration that spoke of a mind honed by years in state police, her demeanor all business and zero tolerance for sentimentality, the kind of professional who trusted data over dogma. Next to her sat Officer Matt Reyes, the department's youngest recruit at 26, a wiry man with dark-rimmed glasses perched on his nose and a recent degree in digital forensics, typically quiet and precise, speaking only when prompted and always with a low, thoughtful cadence, preferring the clear logic of algorithms to the messy ambiguity of human emotion. Briggs tapped a thick finger on the faded map, pointing directly at the shaded square, marking the abandoned warehouse compound. This compound has 4 main structures, partially collapsed, 0 active leases. Our last patrol check was over 2 years ago, he stated, his voice a low, steady rumble. And a stray German shepherd delivered this evidence right here. He held up the bag, then headed north toward that complex. It belongs to Jake. Claire nodded slowly, her expression unreadable beneath the harsh light. If someone took a former Spec Ops captain and is holding him close to town, that complex is the only spot that consistently fails to register on heat maps or public traffic cams. It's dead ground, just like Ms. Bennett said. Reyes, focused entirely on his laptop screen, finally chimed in, his voice soft but cutting through the tension. I dug into archived K9 files for the region, Sheriff. There was a shepherd matching the physical description. Black and tan, severe malnutrition, old scar on the right ear, former search and rescue. Name was Ranger, partnered with Army officer Sarah Grady before she died 2 years ago. Briggs's heavy eyebrows rose slightly. He remembered the story well. That's the dog that went missing after the fire, ran off during the funeral week and never showed? Reyes confirmed with a silent nod, his fingers already typing again. Claire leaned forward, her tactical mind absorbing the data point. If that's him, he didn't just survive. He's a trained asset who didn't forget his primary function. He's not scavenging, he's leading us. Briggs studied the map again, then looked at his sergeant. Then we work with it. We prep Team Alpha for a dawn search. No sirens, no news leaks. That dog is our only window before the next front rolls in. The decision was made, sealed by the tired conviction of the sheriff and the resolute silence of his team, the 3 figures continuing their hushed, intense planning as the hours dragged relentlessly toward the first pale light of morning. Meanwhile, back in the concrete crypt of the abandoned warehouse, time had ceased to be a measurable concept for Captain Jake Harper. The freezing cold had begun to seep into his limbs, settling bone deep, and the abrasive ropes stung his wrists with every involuntary movement, his body heavy and unresponsive, resigned to the slow, brutal exhaustion of 3 days without light or hope. The air was a metallic, oppressive blend of old oil, damp wood, and his own rising despair. He had stopped counting the footsteps from upstairs, stopped trying to decipher the occasional muttered threats from the captor, Ray Morton. Then, through the smothering stillness, a sound broke the surface of the silence. Soft, too soft to be human, the faint click of claws against concrete, followed by a soft, warm exhale, startlingly close to his bound wrists. Jake stiffened immediately, his entire body going rigid with an instinct born of combat. "Is someone there?" he croaked, his voice a brittle whisper, rough from thirst and disuse. There was no verbal answer, only a palpable presence, something low and watchful, followed by a sensation that shocked the last vestiges of despair out of him. A warm, wet tongue against his wrist, quick, careful and deliberate, avoiding the raw skin where the rope cut deepest. Jake gasped, a ragged, involuntary jerk of surprise running through his body. "Wait. Hey, dog." His words came out uncertainly, almost a plea. He held absolutely still, his heart now hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The tongue came again, this time licking gently at the rough cord itself, as if testing the integrity of the binding. Jake went completely, utterly still. He recognized this focused, non-wild behavior instantly. It wasn't fear, it wasn't hunger, it was training. It was deliberate, controlled, highly specialized action. The dog repositioned, a soft grind of claws against the cement, and Jake felt warm fur brush against his exposed ankle, followed by a gentle, firm pressure against the rough cloth covering his eyes. Teeth, soft but decisive, caught the edge of the blindfold knot. The knot, tied badly in haste by Morton, slowly yielded to the calculated, relentless pressure. Then, suddenly, painfully, there was light. Dim, pulsing, hazy light from the single bulb, but enough to make Jake recoil and squint, his vision burning with the sudden, agonizing contrast. When his eyes finally adjusted, swimming into focus through the intense glare and the haze of exhaustion, he saw him. Ranger. The German Shepherd was lean but powerfully built, his once pristine black and tan coat matted with mud and rime, ragged from exposure, an obvious limp dragging his rear leg, and the distinct notch in his ear confirming his identity as a warrior. But it was the eyes that held him. Deep amber, alert, and ringed with a profound old sadness, yet burning with the disciplined focus of a professional. Jake choked back a wave of unexpected raw emotion, his voice thick with gratitude and disbelief. "You. Where did you come from, Sentinel?" Ranger merely stared at him, his ears perked, then padded forward and sniffed the ropes securing Jake's feet. "Smart," Jake whispered, a faint, real smile touching his dry lips despite the pain, recognizing the tactical assessment. "You're trying to help me out of this." The shepherd gave no physical response, only circled once, then settled down beside Jake with the absolute, military stillness of a dog on guard, his presence an immediate, palpable promise of protection. The bond was forged. The lonely soldier had found his forgotten sentinel, but the storm was still hours away, and the mission had just begun. The hours between midnight and dawn were the coldest and the longest, dragging relentlessly both for the confined soldier and the waiting team. Jake Harper, despite the renewed hope sparked by Ranger, still fought the bitter, paralyzing chill and the numb ache in his restrained limbs. But now he had an anchor. Ranger, silent and unwavering, remained crouched low beside him, the dog's warmth and steady breathing a constant, tactile reminder that he wasn't alone. Then, Ranger's head snapped up, ears twitching violently, catching a vibration in the floorboards above, a distinct, heavy footfall that was growing nearer, followed by the metallic rasp of a latch being tested outside the thick concrete door. Jake stiffened instantly. "He's coming back," he whispered, the question unnecessary, confirmed by Ranger's immediate response. The dog lowered his body into a coiled, defensive crouch, every muscle tense, the ragged fur along his spine raising slightly, his eyes, deep amber and filled with focus, fixed on the door. "You should go, Sentinel," Jake murmured, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Get out of here before he sees you." But Ranger didn't budge, holding his ground with the rigid refusal of a veteran who understands the concept of holding the line. Outside, just beyond the collapsing chain-link fence perimeter of the old lumberyard, two unmarked SUVs idled silently, their engines barely whispering against the roar of the wind, lights dimmed to mere pinpricks. Inside, Sheriff Mason Briggs hunched over a handheld tablet, his brow deeply furrowed beneath his wool-lined cap, watching the grainy black and white thermal feedback streamed from a hidden drone unit circling high above. Beside him, Sergeant Claire Durham, bundled in charcoal tactical gear that made her look even more compact and dangerous, her close-cropped hair tucked beneath a tight balaclava, her short-barreled rifle held at the low-ready position, never took her eyes off the target structure. "We've got movement in the basement again, Sheriff," she reported, her voice low and tight over the headset. "Warm body just entered. Large build male. Confirmed. That's him." Standing further back, Directing the two surrounding containment teams with minimal, sharp hand signals was Deputy Aaron Leach, mid-30s, solidly built with a well-maintained red beard and a reputation for being meticulous and reliable under extreme pressure. The quiet, steady workhorse of the Red Hollow PD. "East access door is still sealed," Leach reported into his mic, "but we found a distinct trail coming from the slope by the old loading ramp. Boot prints and large paw prints. Dog and man, Sheriff. They match Ms. Bennett's report exactly." Briggs adjusted his radio mic, his voice a low command of steel. "Team Alpha holds its position. Team Beta, prepare the breach point. We go on my mark. No gunfire unless fired upon. We want Jake breathing." Claire's voice confirmed immediately. Cold and clear. "Copy that." Back inside the basement, the single bulb cast dancing, anxious shadows as the heavy metal door finally groaned open, revealing the angular, hunched silhouette of the captor, Ray Morton, 57 years old, a heavyset man whose flannel coat was frayed at the sleeves and whose jeans were permanently stained with oil and neglect. His face, framed by a disheveled beard and thinning, slicked-back black hair, was dominated by a long, visible scar running down his left jawline, a relic from his volatile past as a disgruntled night guard at a now-shuttered mental health facility. Morton shuffled in, holding a cheap flashlight and a tray of barely touched cold food, his deep-set eyes scanning the room with unreadable, volatile intensity. "You sleeping, Deputy?" Rye muttered, setting the tray down carelessly. "Bet you're hungry. I've been generous, haven't I?" Jake remained silent, knowing that provocation was the fuel Morton craved. Morton's voice rose, laced with bitter, simmering resentment. "You were always smiling on your patrols, always looking down on us, like you knew something we didn't. Now look who's blind and tied up." He leaned in close, his stale cigarette breath hitting Jake's face. "You forgot people like me existed." In the dark corner, Ranger shifted almost imperceptibly, his body vibrating with restraint, his amber eyes locked not on Morton's face, but on the small leather pouch hanging from his belt, where a box cutter was sheathed. Morton stepped back, muttering to himself, circling slowly toward the back of the room, distracted by his own toxic grievance. That was Ranger's cue. Silent as a spirit, he crept along the far wall, each heavy paw placed with the surgical care of his long-forgotten training. Rye completely oblivious to the shadow closing in behind him. Jake, watching the movement from the edge of his recently freed vision, whispered a single, barely audible warning, a word only a K-9 handler would understand. "Wait." Morton turned back, his eyes finally landing on the dark shape. He froze, his face twisting from resentment into shock, then rage. "You again? What the—" He lunged toward his belt. Ranger didn't wait. With a single explosive command bark, loud, sharp, and designed to cut through walls, the dog launched himself directly at Morton's chest, teeth aimed not for flesh, but for the critical gear, the box cutter. The two bodies crashed to the concrete floor with a violent, sickening impact, the box cutter skittering away out of reach, and Jake, chair and all, tumbled sideways, his heart racing, the chair momentarily protecting his body. The second the explosive bark registered in Briggs's ear, the sheriff gave the final, sharp order, "Go! Go! Go!" The door slammed open instantly, tactical flashlights cutting the darkness into blinding, chaotic shards. "Freeze! Police! Hands where we can see them!" Claire Durham's voice, sharp as a whip crack, cut through the din. Briggs followed her in, weapon drawn, while Deputy Leach rushed immediately to Jake, producing a small knife to cut the ropes. "We got you, Captain. You're safe now." Jake, blinking hard against the sudden light, looked past Leach at Ranger, who stood resolute and snarling over the stunned, disarmed Morton. "The dog," Jake rasped, a wave of relief washing over him. "He brought you. He's the one." Briggs paused only for a moment to glance at the sentinel guarding his prize. "Good boy," he murmured, his tired face softening just before he focused back on the prisoner. The mission had succeeded. The scent of antiseptic hung thick in the air of the Red Hollow Community Hospital, mingling with the sterile artificial brightness of the room where Captain Jake Harper slowly began his physical and mental reckoning. He lay propped up in the thin, white hospital bed, his right wrist bandaged where the ropes had rubbed him raw. A faint IV line running from his elbow, the steady, rhythmic beep of the monitoring machines, a dull counterpoint to the quiet anxiety gripping the town. The physical aches, the bruised ribs, the constant gnawing hunger were secondary now. What resonated loudest was the absence, the immediate, profound silence left by the dog who had saved his life, the absence of his sentinel. A soft knock preceded the door's gentle creak, and Sheriff Mason Briggs entered, his long brown coat dusted with remnants of snow, his face visibly etched with the lines of another sleepless, difficult night. But his gray eyes carried a hint of relieved exhaustion. He was followed by Sergeant Claire Durham, whose posture remained as ramrod straight and composed as always, though the tightness around her mouth suggested the adrenaline of the breach hadn't quite faded. Briggs pulled a chair close to the bedside. "Morning, Captain. How are you feeling?" Jake pushed himself upright slightly, managing a dry, military joke. "Like I just went 10 rounds with a wood chipper, Sheriff, but intact. Thank you, both of you." Claire allowed a faint, brief smile to cross her lips. "Good. That means you're still yourself." "Morton?" Jake asked, already knowing the answer from the quiet confidence in the room. "In custody," Briggs confirmed, his voice dropping slightly. "He's not talking much beyond rambling grievances, but we're piecing together the timeline. He mentioned something, Captain." Briggs leaned forward. "He said he bought you, said he was buying a replacement." Jake's eyes narrowed, the memories sharp and cold. "He wasn't acting alone, Sheriff. He mentioned a name, or rather, a condition. He said someone promised him a child who could replace Jessica." Claire stiffened immediately, sensing the sinister shift in the narrative. "Jessica? Who is Jessica?" Jake asked. "His daughter," Briggs answered heavily, the weight of the tragedy settling on the room. "Died 3 years ago in a car crash that also took his wife. Looks like he never came back from that loss. Turned his grief into a twisted form of vengeance." Claire added quickly, her analysis clinical. "He's not stable enough to be the mastermind, Captain. His rage is authentic, but the planning, the burner phones, the isolated compound, the specific targeting of a former Special Forces officer, it's too sophisticated for a man operating on pure spite. If someone else handed you over, we're dealing with something much, much bigger than a local grievance." Jake processed the horrifying revelation, the idea of being a pawn in a larger, darker game, more unnerving than the ropes, after Saftung. A long, strained pause, he asked the question that truly mattered. "And the dog, Sheriff? Ranger?" Briggs shook his head slowly, genuinely disappointed. "He's gone. Our team saw him bolt straight for the tree line just as Deputy Leach got you untied. Disappeared before we could even tag him." Claire looked at Jake, her expression softening marginally. "You said he was trained, Captain. Better than trained." Jake nodded, remembering the quiet precision in the darkness. "More than trained, Sergeant. He knew flanking maneuvers, when to stay low, when to break cover. He watched for commands I couldn't even give. He was pure K9 spec ops." Briggs exchanged a significant glance with Claire. "That fits perfectly with what we learned from Lisa Bennett, the vet. She dug up old records this morning. She used to treat a K9 named Ranger, assigned to Army officer Sarah Grady, the dog that ran off after Grady's funeral 2 years ago." Jake's jaw tightened. Sarah Grady, I remember her. She was the best. Died in that training incident 2 years ago." Briggs finished the painful connection. Ranger disappeared the day of her memorial. No one's seen him since until now. Jake leaned back against the pillows, the truth settling heavily into his chest, a deep, resonant sadness mingling with his gratitude. Then he didn't just survive, Sheriff. He remembered who he was. He found a new mission. Meanwhile, Lisa Bennett, unable to stay away from the mission, sat quietly in her small, cluttered cabin, the windows fogged with the steam of a boiling kettle, the living room dominated by stacked books and a threadbare but comfortable couch. She had folded the bloody fleece pad, where Ranger had briefly rested, placing it with reverence on a low shelf. A voice called from the kitchen. Danny Farrow, her neighbor and longtime friend, walked into the living room holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. Danny was a man in his 40s, bearded and wiry, often seen in grease-streaked overalls from his auto repair shop, but his eyes were soft and kind. "You okay, Les?" he asked, setting a mug beside her. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the quiet forest outside. "I'm fine, Danny. Just thinking about the dog. He's not just a stray, Danny. His name is Ranger. He was K9. He saved Captain Harper's life." Danny sat beside her, sipping his tea slowly. "So where is he now? The papers are calling him a legend." Lisa didn't answer right away, her eyes distant, fixed on the tree line. "Out there, Danny, watching, healing, waiting for someone to come find him, waiting for the next order." Danny looked at her determined profile. "Then we will find him." Lisa turned to him, a faint, determined light in her eyes. "We will." Back at the station, the newly established task force, a mix of local police and the sheriff's department, was already in motion. Briggs stood outside the interview room, staring through the one-way mirror at Ray Morton, who sat motionless, staring at his hands. Claire, Durham entered the observation room, holding her notebook open. "He's repeating the same statement, Sheriff," she murmured. "He said, they all just strays. Nobody misses them if they don't bark. And that the man in the white van promised him a replacement for Jessica." Briggs's voice dropped, cold and sharp. "Get Officer Reyes back on archived missing children cases. I want every unsolved abduction from the last 5 years in the Tri-County area cross-referenced. This is bigger than Morton." Claire nodded, her eyes now mirroring the sheriff's grim realization. "And I already started tracing the source of the burner phone signal. It pinged near the decommissioned Cold Pine Scout Camp, west of the highway. Off-grid for years, easy to conceal a vehicle. The search for a missing hero had abruptly become a hunt for a shadow organization, driven by Ranger's sacrifice and Morton's cryptic confession. The Red Hollow Sheriff's Department was no longer a small, sleepy municipal office. It had transformed overnight into a makeshift command center, the air thick with stale coffee, the glow of monitors reflecting off tired faces, and the central whiteboard covered in scribbled names, blurry license plates, and concentric circles tracing phone pings. Agent Mike Hanley, mid-40s, clean-cut with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of tailored, unwrinkled suit jacket that suggested tireless efficiency, stood at the center of the room, his presence immediately signaling the involvement of federal authority. The FBI's Missing Persons Unit had arrived. Hanley spoke with quiet, professional authority, his steel-blue eyes missing nothing. "Ray Morton's burner phone traffic confirms contact near the decommissioned Cold Pine Scout Camp, west of the highway. It's off-grid for years, perfect cover for vehicles and personnel." Officer Matt Reyes, having worked through the night on archived data, pushed a printout across the map table. "Cross-referenced all missing children cases within a 5-year radius across the Tri-County area, per the sheriff's order. 4 active, unsolved abductions. One common theme: victims marked as invisible, Runaways, addicts, isolated residents. And then Captain Harper, a high-profile soldier, used as a disposable pawn. Briggs, his jaw tight, rubbed the side of his neck. "This isn't random. This is a supply chain." Hanley nodded, his gaze fixed on the map. "We have a confirmed sighting. Trail cam footage from 3 nights ago shows a white van parked along the tree line near Cold Pine. Driver not identified, face covered, vehicle registered under a fake ID. We have probable cause, Sheriff. We've already deployed surveillance teams." Meanwhile, miles away from the intense professional urgency of the station, Lisa Bennett and Danny Farrow were undertaking a different, quieter kind of search, one driven by instinct and loyalty. Lisa was bundled in a heavy plaid coat, her hands, too small for the wool gloves Danny had lent her, busily pinning scraps of flannel to the low-hanging branches of fir trees at the edge of the woods behind her clinic. Her expression was intensely focused, her movements precise. She had mapped the route based on the direction Ranger had vanished after the rescue, marking the trail with these cloth strips scented with lavender oil, a scent she knew the sensitive German shepherd nose would register. And crucially, tiny pieces of the shirt Jake had been wearing, familiar smells tied to the safety of his presence. Danny, wind-burned and layered in his oil-stained canvas overalls, followed her, his boots crunching softly on the snow. "This the last one?" he asked, his voice low, pulling a sealed container of cooked chicken from a cooler to lay out a small dish. Lisa nodded, not looking up, pinning the last piece. "It's the exact route he took before. That K9 memory, Danny, it's not like a regular dog's. It holds." Danny gave a sideways, fond smile, pouring the steaming water into a metal cap. "He's a dog, Lise. You talk about him like he's still in the service." "He is," she replied simply, her voice carrying the absolute conviction of someone who understood the true nature of the animal. They worked in silence, systematically lining the route back from the woods toward the edge of town, creating a beacon of scent and familiarity. Lisa knew animals ran from trauma and danger, but the small, insistent hope inside her, the part that grieved her own lost dog years ago, believed some came back, if given a clear reason to trust, a clear path home. As they reached the final bend in the mapped trail, where the sparse trees met the open field, Danny paused suddenly, lifting a gloved hand and holding his breath. "Lisa," he whispered, his voice catching. She stopped, turning slowly, following his fixed gaze. A figure stood at the tree line, absolutely still. Ranger. His coat was muddier, his body gaunt, ribs slightly visible under the patchy fur, the limp more pronounced than before, but his amber eyes, sharp, steady, and recognizing, met hers across the small distance, and did not waver. "Ranger!" Lisa dropped instantly to one knee, ignoring the icy snow. She held perfectly still, allowing the decision to be entirely his. Ranger took one cautious step forward, then another, assessing. Then, with a sudden burst of decision, he was running, not fleeing, but running straight towards her, and moments later he was safe, burrowed into her arms, his exhausted weight a profound, heavy relief. He had completed his solo mission and had finally sought his own shelter. The unexpected arrival of Ranger, the single most important witness and asset, changed everything back at the command center. Agent Mike Hanley sat at the map table, his focus now split between the Cold Pine coordinates and the data Lisa was providing. "This is the break we needed," Hanley stated. "The dog has been hiding, healing, and watching. He is the connection we are missing." Lisa, seated beside Ranger, who lay quietly on a blanket in the corner, gently rested her hand on the dog's back. "He's not just a witness, Agent Hanley. He's the lead. He won't give up on Jake, and he won't give up on those missing kids. He's waiting for the next order." Briggs, now standing beside Hanley, nodded decisively, his tired face resolute. "Captain Harper is still technically on leave, but we're making an exception. Ranger only truly responded to him in the field. We need the soldier and the sentinel back together. We move on the Cold Pine camp at first light, and Ranger leads the way." The final stage of the hunt was set, driven by the instinct of the dog who had finally chosen to rejoin the fight. The first pale light of dawn crept over the pines of Red Hollow with a chilling, almost ceremonial brilliance. But inside the makeshift command center, the atmosphere was a focused, electric hum of activity. Agent Mike Hanley stood before the map-coded table, his voice low and steady, projecting a quiet confidence that settled over the assembled tactical teams. "It's happening today, gentlemen. Coordinates locked. 2 hours before the designated handoff. We have limited time." Sheriff Briggs, grayer and more resolute than ever, gave a sharp, decisive nod. "Everyone's briefed. No mistakes. We go in silent." In the corner of the room, on a worn fleece blanket Lisa had provided, Ranger sat alert, ears pricked high, his amber gaze fixed intently on the projection of the wooded Cold Pine scout camp, where the white van had last been spotted. Though the dog made no sound, his presence felt like a palpable, steady heartbeat in the room. Beside him, Captain Jake Harper, dressed in tactical black fatigues, an exception made for the mission, rested a hand lightly on Ranger's back. He still favored his left leg slightly, but the steadiness was back in his eyes, the look of a soldier returning to the field. "He's ready," Jake confirmed quietly, feeling the familiar, responsive tension beneath his palm. The road winding into Cold Pines was cloaked in heavy, muffling silence, the recent snow-absorbing sound like a thick, white cushion. The joint tactical team, clad in charcoal gear, moved like shadows between the dense evergreen trees. They were guided not by GPS alone, but by a force more ancient and reliable. Ranger led them, nose low to the packed snow, navigating scent trails and faint disturbances invisible to the human eye, his limp forgotten, his movement now a fluid, disciplined glide. Behind him, Jake walked with measured, practiced steps, his breath ghosting visibly in the freezing air, his focus entirely on the dog's subtle cues. Though technically still on medical leave, Jake's authorization to accompany the raid was a calculated risk. Ranger had responded only to him since the rescue, and no handler could replace the bond forged in that concrete basement days ago. The team reached a small, exposed clearing. Parked beneath the collapsed wooden structure of an old mess hall was the white van, exactly as the trail cam footage had shown. Hanley raised a gloved fist, and the entire team halted instantly, melting into the cover of the tree line. Jake crouched beside Ranger, whispering a low, guttural command. Ranger was tense, tail stiff, his head tilted, analyzing sounds and scents Jake couldn't hear. The subtle churn of a hidden ventilation fan, the faint scent of diesel and cheap cologne. Then, with a low, deep growl, Ranger abruptly veered left, abandoning the direct path to the van's cabin and moving purposefully toward the rear door. A door creaked open. A man stepped out of the van, tall, wiry, his face obscured by a ski mask, carrying a clipboard in one hand, his other shoved deep in his coat pocket. As he moved toward a stack of pallets, another figure emerged, shorter, broader, clearly armed. Hanley's voice crackled softly over Jake's radio. "Hold, Harper, hold." But Ranger suddenly stopped at the van's rear doors and issued a sharp, single bark, a sound Jake knew instantly wasn't an alert for the team, but a warning aimed at the contents of the van itself, a protective call. Jake's blood ran cold. The kids were inside. Hanley wasted no time. "Go, go, go!" The tactical team surged forward. The taller man spun around, dropping the clipboard and reaching for his waistband, but he was too slow, overwhelmed by the sudden, coordinated rush of motion. Within seconds, both suspects were disarmed, cuffed, and face down in the snow, Claire Durham securing the taller man with ruthless efficiency. Hanley, bypassing the suspects entirely, yanked open the back doors of the van. The interior was dark, cramped, and terrifying. Curled into opposite corners were two small children, a girl and a boy, no older than 9, their wrists secured with zip ties, faces pale, eyes wide with trauma. The boy whimpered faintly. The girl just stared, wide-eyed and unmoving, until Ranger, ignoring the chaos of the arrests, leapt into the van, lay down between the two terrified children, and gently licked the boy's cheek. The tension in the vehicle cracked instantly. The girl buried her face in Ranger's thick fur and began to sob, while the boy reached out a trembling hand and tentatively touched the dog's coat. Deputy Aaron Leach and Officer Matt Reyes, now moving into the vehicle to secure the children, looked at the dog and the children clinging to him, their professional detachment dissolving into shared, profound relief. "The Sentinel delivered," Leach whispered into his headset. The news broke within hours. Helicopters circled Red Hollow, the rescue footage, grainy, unsteady, but intensely real, showing Ranger climbing out of the van, children clinging to his neck, FBI agents streaming in behind. National anchors spoke his name like he was a legend, but back in town, the true emotion moved quieter. Jake sat beside Sheriff Briggs on the steps of the station house, watching as Lisa Bennett arrived in her pickup truck, her auburn hair braided back, a subtle, proud smile tugging at her lips. In the passenger seat, she had a cooler of fresh food and a tote bag filled with warm dog blankets. Ranger trotted out to meet her, sniffing the tote approvingly. "He likes salmon," Lisa teased, reaching down to scratch behind his ear. "Now you tell me," Jake replied, rising slowly to greet her. Briggs stepped forward, clearing his throat, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. "Lisa Bennett, on behalf of Red Hollow, the FBI, and the state, thank you for your contribution to the safe return of Ranger and the identification of multiple victims." Lisa gave a modest nod, looking down at the ground. "I just fed a stray, Sheriff." Briggs shook his head, his eyes fixed on the dog standing proudly between them. "No, Ms. Bennett, you fed a soldier, and he saved ours. If this tale stirred you, share it so the light travels. Comment the small miracle you've witnessed, and subscribe to Journey May. God bless you and yours. Calm for rough nights, mended quiet fractures, and a new morning at your door where courage meets kindness, and the small becomes miraculous.